Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I'm breaking one of my rules. I have an actual attorney on, James Sexton. You've been doing a lot in San Diego, and I've been kind of intrigued, and I thought you'd be a great person to talk to and ask questions, because a lot of my patients have questions, employers have questions. So tell people your story. Welcome. It's good to have you from Sexton Law Firm. And usually us docs, we try to avoid you guys, right?
Well, for the most part, yeah, it's like going to the dentist, I guess. Yes, it's something you got to do sometimes, but you really don't want to.
No, you guys are doing great work, and I think the attorneys, a lot of attorneys are kind of saving the day right now because they're bringing things to light that a lot of us really can't talk about. And I think it's a tough day for medicine, and I think the attorneys are going to be the wealthiest people on earth in the near future with a lot of stuff you have going on. So tell people your story and what brought you into law? Let's start back there. Where was the attraction for you to say, hey, I think I'll go to law school?
As far as going to law school, I never thought growing up I'd be an attorney and be a lawyer, or at least even have my own law firm. I was owner of my own law firm. I went to college, and that's probably the last thing on my mind was to try and get into law school. But as I got out of college, I sort of bounced around on a bunch of different jobs. Believe it or not, I did everything from selling vacuum cleaners door to door, to working as a janitor in a warehouse, to selling advertising, to selling textbooks, working for a major, textbook company at one time in Orlando, Florida. And then I said, wow, I want to do something more than this. What else can I do? And I've always been a problem solver. And I think I read an article that one of the things attorneys do is their main job is to solve problems. And I said, that's sort of interesting. So I applied. Well, first I took the SAT test, which is like the SAT, but for law. And I did fairly good. And I said, wow, that's pretty interesting. Maybe I should apply to different schools. And I was living in Orlando, Florida at the time. I applied to several law schools. And one of the schools I applied to was California Western School of Law here in San Diego, California. And by sheer coincidence, I'd been out to San Diego on a job-related thing. That the company I'd worked for was called Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. It was a major textbook company. At one time, they actually owned all the SeaWorlds of the United States, including the one here in San Diego. So I'd come out here on business, and I said, wow, if I do decide to go to law school, wouldn't it be nice to come here to San Diego, look at the ocean and look at the weather, and it seems like a wonderful place, and this is great. So, but if I had known that only about 35% of the people passed the bar exam, and the cost of living was so high, and the ocean was only 60 degrees instead of like 80 degrees where I was coming from in Florida, maybe I wouldn't have come, but I didn't know any of those things. So I came out and went to law school and took it on from there. And here I am 31 years later.
Yeah, that's what I did for residency. I go, well, where do you do residency? You typically live around, like, San Diego seems like a nice place. Everywhere else is really expensive to live, in California at least. I'm a West Coast guy. So that's how I kind of gravitated out here. And then I came across you. You wrote an article for Reopen San Diego, and you were kind of talking about some of the legal aspects of the COVID vaccination and COVID. And so many people have questions. My patients are calling me all the time. They have questions about, hey, my boss is going to fire me if I don't get vaccinated, or with the mandates, or with the working in healthcare. I know your area is more doing the workers' comp, right?
Yeah, we do all sorts of workers' comp injuries, but here's the deal. If your employer mandates you get the COVID vaccine and you get serious side effects, that's a workers' compensation claim, just as it would be if you picked up a box and blew out your back. Same rules apply. A lot of people don't know that. They think, oh, it must be on me. I just had bad luck. I took the vaccination voluntarily and something bad happened, and it's just bad luck. There's nothing I can do about it. No, absolutely not. 100% true. That is a valid workers' compensation claim if your employer mandates you to get that type of an injection and something should seriously happen to you. God forbid if that should happen. I have any number of cases now. Crystal clear, the California Court of Appeals, California Supreme Court has ruled on these issues before, these vaccine types of injuries. And this just happens to be the new one on the horizon here, these COVID vaccine injuries. and it's probably the hottest area of the workers' compensation law now. The problem is, like I said, a lot of people have the misconception there's nothing they can do about it, and they just sort of let it go, and they suffer with these symptoms, and that's that. But I'm here to tell you, no. I've had any number of cases now, and to be honest, we haven't settled on any of them yet because they're so recent. But I've had other COVID injuries at work. You can also have a workers' compensation from getting COVID at your place of work, believe it or not. And I've had lots of settlements in that area. I don't know if I can give you the figures on that on your. Can I let you know this one?
You can say whatever you want. It doesn't affect me.
Over $500,000. So I mean, that's not that significant, and they're out there. And like I said, I've yet to settle one, take it all the way through in the vaccine injuries because they're relatively, brand new, but they're compensable workers' comp cases. The other interesting thing people ask all the time is, it's still a workers' comp case even if, they give me the option of taking a test every week or getting the vaccine, and I say, no, I don't want to, opt getting that test every week, so I'm just going to take the vaccine. That would be arguably no, because then you're doing it voluntarily. They give you the option of taking the test and you chose to get the vaccine. Of course, there is an exception to that. The California Labor Code has dictated that healthcare workers, if you have that same choice, get the vaccine or get tested every week. If you're in the healthcare, if you're with any type of, from a nursing home to hospital to, anywhere they keep medical records, basically, and they give you that option and you decide, okay, I'll go for the shot, and you get that vaccine and you do have serious side effects, even though you did that technically voluntarily because you're in the healthcare industry and they want to stop the spread of the, the COVID type of thing in the healthcare environment, and the doctor at the healthcare place actually gave you the shot there. That's a workers' comp case. Not everyone from the janitor to the housekeeper to the cook to the nurse, anyone involved in it, that's a healthcare worker, and that is a bona fide workers' comp claim, even if they gave you the opt-out. But unfortunately, other people, if they do it and they give you the option of getting the test and you're not in the healthcare industry, then yeah, they have a good argument that's voluntary and it wasn't mandatory, and that's sort of on you, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a lot of legal actions open. As far as I know, OSHA just rolled back their mandates. I think they were just talking about it yesterday. I was kind of just glancing at it today, saying about the mandatory testing and the mandatory vax. So right now, if employers are going for mandatory vaccination, I think then all the liability is now going to lie on them because they can't blame it on the federal government anymore, if what I'm understanding is correct.
But even if it was mandated, it's the same thing. It still is part of your employment. There's crystal clear case law on that from the California Supreme Court. Even if it's mandated by OSHA or anyone else, and we're just following orders here at the ABC employment because the government says you have to get it. Doesn't matter. It's still covered under workers' comp, and that's the problem. You brought it up too. A lot of these things, we're not sure the ramifications of these side effects. These things could be happening years from now, for all we know. That's the scary thing about all these vaccinations. Now, to be honest, I don't want to scare anyone. The majority of the people have minor symptoms and they're generally okay. We're talking about that small percentage, for whatever reason, has really nasty side effects from these vaccinations. Same thing with the COVID. I myself had COVID. I was better in less than a week. I was one of the fortunate ones, but it is a real thing. But for the vast majority of people, it's relatively minor, but they're, for whatever reason, predisposed, illnesses, people with overweight, diabetes, extremely high blood pressure. Those appear to be the people who are adversely affected from the COVID versus people who don't have any of those things. And as a medical professional, I'm sure you've seen that over and over. But here's an attorney. I can just tell you there are people out there who are getting sick from these injections and getting very sick from COVID, getting it at work.
And I think that's a concern, as docs are seeing the same. But our medical boards have threatened us, saying, hey, if you talk about what you're seeing, we're going to take your license. And for me, the problem becomes, if we have ethics, we say, my job is to discuss the risks and the benefits and say, look, if you're 80 years old, you're diabetic, you're obese, you have all these health problems. Look, here's the risk and the benefit of not getting the vaccination, of getting the vaccination. Here's the risk if you do get COVID. Here's the risk of, and allow my patient to make the decision. And that's why, I came out saying, look, I'm against the mandate. I don't think you can mandate this especially if what you're saying is true, is that we're seeing, I'm seeing side effects. I'm seeing people come in with claims that are just unbelievable. Both from COVID and from the vaccination. So I think it's really important that we can be open and honest and have a discussion about, what we're seeing, and say, okay, look, it's 1 in a million chance, or 1 in 1,000 chance, or whatever, and have an informed consent discussion.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against vaccines in general. I mean, if there's a polio vaccine, and I'd be first in line. But for something like this, for really healthy people or even children, I mean, we can get into ethics and politics or whatever, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me that, you have to mandate these things. And like you said, it's technically it comes back on the employer, but it's really the employer's workers' compensation insurance. So what's going to happen is, if they do get a lot of these claims, which we're starting to see, these employers' workers' compensation insurance is going to go up, just like if you have insurance, car insurance, and you get a lot of car accidents, your car insurance is going to go up. So that's where it's really going to bite them, in the long run, probably.
Yeah, that's going to be a big issue, and there's going to be a lot. And I'm seeing some of the bigger corporations now rolling back their vax mandate, because I'm sure they have attorneys like you saying, "Hey guys, look, here's the long-term ramification that's coming." Right? It's not out of the kindness of their heart.
Well, they got to do a cost analysis. So, if we do pay out in these types of claims, what are we looking at for that versus, having the mandatory vaccinations? And I understand the reasoning behind it. It's not so much people are being like, dictators in these healthcare industries and places of employment. They want a safer work environment. I mean, a lot of them just are uninformed about these ramifications of the vaccines. You watch shows on TV like CNN or something, you're unpatriotic if you don't get the vaccine or something. You're a bad American. You're not a good employee, type of thing, which I think is unfair, but it mischaracterizes.
I agree. And that's something we come back to and say, look, let's look at the data. If you're vaccinated, are you less likely to give it to grandma and grandpa? No. Are you less likely to get it? No. Are you less likely to end up in the hospital? Based on what we're hearing, yes. So it comes down to, for yourself, making that decision. Am I afraid of dying of COVID? Because if you're doing it to save society, you're really not, right? Because the bottom line, as you already brought up, we do know that the metabolically sick, I've talked to the world experts with treating COVID. Brian Tyson happens to be in town. I just had him on the podcast. And all of these guys said the same thing. It's the metabolically sick. It's the ones who are diabetic. And not only obesity, but really the visceral fat, the metabolic sickness with high triglycerides, what we call metabolic syndrome. Depression, anxiety is a huge predisposing factor also. So a lot of these things that people were so scared, they locked themselves in their house. They weren't exercising. They couldn't go to the gym, but they could go to the fast food restaurant. Also not going out in the sun and going for a walk on the beach and all these, because the fear that was instilled in people. So a lot of these things are going to come back. We're going to realize that a lot of the stuff that was recommended may have been not in people's best interest in the long run.
No, I think it was downright crazy, to be quite honest. Just a little aside, I like working out myself, and I found a gym that stayed open during the lockdowns, and we actually put plastic garbage bags over the windows so no one could see inside. And I would go at like 11 o'clock at night. I'd still work out.
Yeah, there were a lot of businesses, especially I know in El Cajon, that they stayed open, and they didn't have an increase of cases. There was nothing that stood out in those. And as far as I know, talking to the mayor of El Cajon, Bill Wells, who was on the podcast also, there was not a dime paid out in fines for those businesses. It was just a scary, they were just showing their teeth at the health department.
Yeah, I actually felt safer working out at the gym than I would at Home Depot. So it doesn't. So go figure. But
well, the irony is, a good friend of mine had to close his gym down, and we had a meeting at his place, and it was closed. He was closing it down, but the strip club right across the street from him was wide open. There was cars in front and all that kind of. And you look and you think, wow. I mean, if you're going to be exposed, I mean, you're in there drinking and partying, you're more likely to get it than being in someone's gym and social distance with one person working out at a time.
No, I don't think you got to just clean off, wash my hands after using the equipment. But no one at the gym is, right in your face type of thing. I mean, but at Home Depot, there's people all over the place, and I mean, it just didn't make any sense.
And then also in San Diego, we closed down the parks, going for a hike. So it was ironic, Mission Trails was closed down because it's a county park, and so I couldn't go for a hike there. But every single person could go on the Santee Trail, and there was like hundreds of people on top of each other. You go, well, this doesn't make very much sense. It would be a lot smart to be away on the country by yourself, because most people who are hiking don't want to be walking with strangers anyways. We're just gonna naturally social distance. That's just what we do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I got into this, my daughter, I don't know if you know, was a nurse, and she didn't get the COVID vaccine, but she did get all these other vaccines a few years ago. And sure enough, she developed an autoimmune disease. She got like 4 different vaccines, flu vaccines, some other, I can't even remember the different things. And she broke out from basically her head to toe in black splotches. And finally, we traced it back to the vaccine. She went to all these dermatologists and they couldn't have an answer. And finally, they traced it back. So she was one of the unfortunate ones. And she actually got a medical exemption to continue to be a nurse. She's one of the lucky ones, believe it or not, there. Because like you said, a lot of doctors are somehow, the medical boards don't like doctors giving out medical exemptions to people who are at risk. And
we were flat out told if we write a medical exemption that's inappropriate. So a case like your daughter's, how do you say it's inappropriate? They're saying you have to have anaphylaxis, but we've seen people who have myocarditis or muscle weakness or severe nerve damage or neurologic problems. I'm just trying to go through off the top of my head of recent ones I've talked, severe psoriasis. We've seen these things happen. You think, gosh, if that happened on the first one, what happens on the second? We don't know.
The booster,
so,
yeah. How's that?
The booster, and that's what's hard. And then also, I've had patients who already had COVID. They have natural immunity that were denied. They were kicked out of nursing school and medical school as a result because they were making the argument, I already have better immunity than if I do get vaccinated. And that it's really a hard stance for these.
Yeah.
It's their career on the line, and that's the stress that we're seeing from nurses. And someone like your daughter's situation, you look at that and think, gosh, do I have to give up my career? And I've seen people give up their career already, and that's really, really tough, especially when we have a shortage of doctors and nurses already.
Doesn't make sense to me, but I'm just a simple attorney. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that the point you raised that's interesting too, that I hadn't considered is the business owner is getting squeezed on both sides, because if they have cases of COVID in their business, they can it's a workers' comp case, or if people have vaccine injuries, they can have a workers' comp case. I don't know which one of those is, because causality is very difficult. The same thing, I've seen people. I have a case that it wasn't my patient, but it was the son of my patient. He received vaccination. He had seizure disorder within 3 hours of getting it. And they kept saying, no, it's not from this. It's like, he's never had it before. He's a 23-year-old healthy athlete that doesn't drink, smoke, take drugs. He has no risk factors, normal brain MRI and all this stuff. And I think a lot of those, like the causality, seems like a lot of doctors are very hesitant to put down certain diagnosis codes. Yeah,
no, that's the thing with the vaccine injuries. They have to connect the dots. There has to be causation. And, a lot of the clients I have, they went to all these different doctors. Oh, you're having a panic attack. You're having this, you're having that. And finally, after several months, they said, oh, wow, the only common factor here is the injection. You didn't get stung by a bumblebee. You're not allergic to peanut butter. I'm being silly, of course, but
no. But I've seen the same. They said, I've seen patients where they sent them to a psychiatrist when they actually had myocarditis and they had shortness of breath, they had swelling in their feet. This does not come from being anxious or stressed. And so I think that's the things that us frontline docs are seeing. And that's when we started getting a little hesitancy, saying, oh my gosh, what do we do? Do we not say something? I mean, I can't sleep at night if I don't tell my patients, look, this is a possibility, right? Yeah. It's a vast, and then here's your possibility on the other end. But like you said, we have to, it's a risk benefit analysis. We look at risk and benefits, right? And I say, look, if a procedure is going, if I send you for brain surgery and there's a 90% chance you die from surgery, right? Or a 75% without surgery, I say, well, here's your odds. You have to look at this stuff. But the surgery can potentially be curative. But my job, I can't just say, yeah, to get the surgery, everything's fine.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But I would just want to bring up a little point here. That's for the vaccine injuries. You have to connect the dots, and you have to show causation and proof, and you have to prove your case, basically. And it that's the problem sometimes, getting a cardiology doctor or cardiologist to say, oh yeah, this is from the injection. This is why we're having the heart issues, the myocarditis and all this other stuff. And but in the workplace, believe it or not, one of the things that Gavin Newsom did and the legislature did that's sort of helpful, they created certain presumptions. And a presumption means it's on the defense side. On the defense side, the insurance company side, to disprove you got COVID at work when you have a presumption like that. And that's hard to do. Normally, you got to prove your case. But when you have these presumptions in the workplace, you're presumed to have got it. And initially, that was for the first responders. As you remember, everyone was on lockdown, and only the essential people could keep their jobs, and the non-essential people stayed home on lockdown. Well, all those essential people if they got COVID, performing their duties, there's a presumption there they got it at work. And then the defense, i.e. the insurance carrier, has to disprove they got it at work. And that happened from basically March, when the lockdowns happened, till about around about July 20th, I think was their cutoff date. So anything since July 20th, there's still presumptions. And they have these really sort of weird presumptions. For example, if you have 100 employees and 4 out of the 100 test positive in the same 2-week period that you got the COVID, it's presumed you got COVID at work. Or if it's 4% of whatever, if it's less than that, if you show 4% that got sick or had had a positive COVID test the same 2-week period of time that you did, it's presumed you got it at work. So that's sort of huge.
And the legalities are massive. As a matter of fact, my attorney for my business, we were talking, he had a client who was admitted for unrelated cause in the hospital for 10 days, and they test him for COVID every single day for 9 days, right? So they were looking for that diagnosis, and they were rotating people that were coughing through his room and all that. This is at the beginning of COVID, and you realize, oh my gosh, they were trying to get this diagnosis code on the chart because they know that they're going to get more reimbursement. So it's really a troubling time, because for me, when I have a small practice on the campus of San Diego Christian, and I met with a bunch of manufacturers for COVID testing machines, because I want to be able to say, what do they do if one kid comes to the class and the next day finds out, I have COVID, I exposed 30 people in that classroom, right? Can I test all those other people in the classroom to see? Guess what? None of the tests on the market are indicated for asymptomatic COVID. Meaning, if you don't have symptoms and I test you, you don't have, it says clinical correlation. So the person has to have the symptoms of COVID and a positive test. But we forgot that. And so anyone who had a positive test, they go, you have COVID. And a lot of those people, you test them 2 days later and they don't have COVID anymore. They disappear all of a sudden without any symptoms. So I think there's a lot where people don't realize that when it's 4% of the if it's a small employer, then it's easier to get 4% with one if you have 25 employees, right? If one person tests positive, then all of a sudden it changes the odds. But if that's a false positive, there's a lot of, what I'm saying, there's a lot of confusion with the testing, where at the beginning we were assuming that every positive test. So what I do know is if you test positive today and I test you every day for the next 2 weeks and you come back positive on all those tests, you're now 14 cases of COVID, right? Which you may have never even had symptoms, but I keep testing you positive. So that's why all these guidelines keep changing, and it's so confusing for people, because before it was 14 days, and now it's 10 days, now it's 5 days, and it keeps changing because we're losing our workforce.
The other thing too, and you're a medical professional, I mean, the coronavirus itself, there's like 100 different types of coronavirus out there. Is that correct?
Yeah, the coronavirus is a common cold, right? The common cold is a coronavirus. So the question is how much of false positive and false negative. As you know, in San Diego County last year, the flu disappeared.
Yeah.
Right? It's never disappeared in 20 years of my career, and all of a sudden it's gone. So you say, where did it go, guys?
A lot of those cases are really the flu or the common cold, I think. But
yeah, so there was a lot. Now December 31st, they said, okay, the old PCR test, we're not going to do that anymore. But what about all these cases that we had before that we had? It's kind of like, the analogy I would use is if you had an airplane that was crashing on takeoff all the time, the FAA would shut it down right now. They wouldn't say, okay, we're going to wait 4 months and then we're not going to use that airplane anymore. You say, no, we're not flying that plane. There's something wrong. But when the doctors question it, because I've had people test positive, negative, in 4 subsequent tests, you go, what does that mean? Do they have it or not? I don't know. I don't know. And they're asymptomatic. So I'd say,
how reliable is the test even? Yeah,
that's the question. And no one's questioning that, as how reliable is the test. It's like if I have a blood pressure cuff and I test your blood pressure a bunch of times and I get different numbers, wildly different every time. We're going to say, well, doc, maybe it's the cuff. Maybe I shouldn't be taking more meds, right? These kind of things that are kind of common sense, but we saw us doctors treating patients were looking, saying, gosh. So then the concern became, and this is from a big manufacturer. I said, hey, look, can I test all the other students for COVID if I get one positive test out of the batch, right? And they said, yeah, doctor, you can test all of them. I said, well, let me ask you a different way. I know I could test them all. And I said, but is it clinically relevant if people are asymptomatic and I get a positive COVID test? What does that mean? And she said, doctor, you get paid for every test you do, right? Right? I mean, test everyone and you get paid for that. You're going to be making, and we all make money. And I thought, I can't do that because
that's like a good deal.
Yeah, because I can test the whole world and I can make a lot of money doing that. As a matter of fact, there's a clinic I drive by every morning on my way to work and I see people lined up around the building, right? I have very few people, because if people are not symptomatic, I say, I can't really test you unless it's a requirement for your work. but still then it's malpractice. It's not going to tell me anything if you test positive or negative, other than you just need that to get in the door at the football game or whatever it is. We can't. But the fact that they're mandating testing for something that is not indicated to test it, right, it is a problem. That would be like me testing everyone for herpes or something, right? It doesn't make sense. It just logically, especially when we look at the numbers for asymptomatic spread, that we have no documentation anywhere, even though there was a study that they had a case report of a lady who was giving asymptomatic spread, but she had already been on flu medicine. She had already been seen in the hospital, and they said she was asymptomatic. How can you possibly be asymptomatic and be taking cold medicine? Do you just like the taste of it? No, of course not. She had symptoms clearly. So I think there's a lot of that where we started getting fearful and then we started reacting. And so I think a lot of this is going to come down to you guys figuring out from a legal perspective how it all pans out.
Yeah. Well, the other issue that you brought up as far as the informed consent, now that's outside of my sphere of workers' compensation, but you got to wonder if there's a monetary incentive to give these vaccines, to do these tests. Are the doctors really up on their informed consent? What are the ingredients of this vaccination? What are the real side effects? What are the long-term effects?
Well, the massive liability was this: all the major hospital groups in San Diego that you know of, because we're in the same community, they were just doing drive-through clinics. Doctors there was never informed consent. They never said, here's what can happen, here's what can't happen. And so I'm like, they're making your job easy, because if I don't give informed consent and you have a bad outcome, that you never say, hey, that's a possibility. And I think stepping back, a lot of the doctors who I know in these big systems say, Ryan, I can't talk about it. I can't talk about risk and benefits. I could just say, but I'm saying, we're called by our Hippocratic oath to discuss the risk and benefits, as are you. If you're going to take a case, you go, look, there's a 5% chance you're going to win this case, or you're not going to. I mean, you have to say, look, realistically, the last 20 of these cases I tried got thrown out. Save your money. Don't pursue this case, right? Because there's going to be enough litigation that you can pursue.
Yeah, it's a weird world. Yeah, a lot of these, I think it's just done to create more fear and more control, to be honest with you. But
yeah, and it's a hard thing, because I think it's outside of your area of law, but I think a lot of, and the other thing is there's the Nuremberg Code where we can't have coercion. You can't say, okay, if you get this, I'm going to give you this, or if you don't do this, I'm going to hold this over your head. Just like, it's in the same line as sexual harassment in the workplace. If you're doing that and say, okay, you're going to lose your job if you don't do certain things for me, or go pick up my laundry or whatever, then that's coercion. That's illegal. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's a big part of it. And the doctors are under pressure again, because these big hospital systems say, look, if X number of your patients aren't vaccinated, you're going to get docked on your pay, because you're not a good doctor. You're not doing what you need to do. And it's a hard thing ethically for some of these docs who've seen, they're not going to just, these doctors who are making whatever they're making, a couple $300,000 a year, they're not just going to walk away unless they've seen stuff that's making them do that. These nurses who are walking away they've seen what they've seen, and they're making a decision based on that. They're looking at the risk and the benefit. And so they're saying, I'm gonna have to give up my career. And I've seen so many people that are suicidal, depressed, anxious, because they have no choice. They're like, either you do this or you're out. Right. Yeah. And that brings up the whole informed consent issue.
Yeah, absolutely terrible.
So where does this go?
I can only speak on the workers' comp side, but yeah, there's employment issues, there's constitutional issues, there's medical malpractice issues. There's a lot of issues that are going to have to be worked out.
Yeah, so I think a lot of you attorneys are I think you're like, what do they call it, fishing in a barrel. I think some of these cases are going to be so straightforward, and either way, I think it's very an interesting time we're living in, no question about it. Yeah. And so I thank you for your work and for looking into this area, because it's really, because a lot of people have had questions about, what do I do if something bad happens? What do I do if I've had these weird things, and if they're having strange symptoms, and it's really scary, because a lot of people, they know they don't have a recourse against the pharmaceutical company who made the product. And the government's not going to pay. So it's like one of those things. But if you look at workers' comp under that, my question would be someone who's, it's not a term of their employment now, right? So they work at the local, mom and pop laundromat or something, and they're not mandating vax. That person goes and gets vaccinated, and they have an injury. Do they have a recourse?
No, not in workers' comp. That was on them. It wasn't mandated by the employer. That was something on their own, unfortunately. So arguably, no, that's not a workers' comp thing. That wasn't a requirement of the employment.
And if the
Unless
employer,
that exception applies, we are in the healthcare industry.
yeah, the healthcare would be a different. But even in that case, if they just went on their own and it's not mandated by their employer, then the employer probably wouldn't be held liable, I would think.
If it was to help stop the spread type of thing and say, hey, you know, this isn't mandatory, but we want to stop the spread here in the hospital or in this nursing home. So we're giving these shots. Here's the doctor. Get in the hallway, line up, and we'll give you the injection. That would be a workers' comp case.
Yeah, that would be a workers' comp. But if they went to the pharmacy down the street and just did it on their own, then that would be a different. It would count on the integrity of the client, I would say.
Yeah, it's on them, unfortunately. Yeah, so more voluntary.
So for an employer out there that's sitting on the fence saying, where do I go? What do I do? I'm a small mom and pop.
Thing. Yeah.
So they're looking at the risk benefit and they say, hey, look, if they know if they mandate it and there's a problem, they're gonna pay for that. That's gonna be an issue.
Yep.
And if they don't mandate it, then they run the risk of, well, here's the question becomes from a legal perspective. If what we're seeing right now holds true and that we're saying it does not stop you from getting COVID or spreading it to other people, I don't see how that the employer could be held liable if they don't mandate the vaccination. I don't know how they could be held liable in that case, because if it was shown that we decrease transmission by 80%, then it's a clear-cut case, right? But if they're not showing that, then all of a sudden you say, well, these cases fall apart, I would say.
Yeah, that's why we have workers' compensation.
And then workers' comp.
That's still to be determined. The medical malpractice, the employment side of it, constitutional side. There's still nothing to be worked out.
There's a lot of issues in it. It's a scary time.
Yeah, a lot of issues that still need to work out. So it'll be interesting to see. These cases are just starting to come forward.
And anything else that we can that people might have that are coming to you with questions about, or something you would want people to know in the setting of COVID?
If you do think it's work related, make a claim right away. Don't wait, because there are certain limitations. Obviously, if you wait 5 years, they're going to say, oh, the statute of limitations is expired. So if nothing else, if you're not sure, better safe than sorry, contact the human resources, contact the supervisor. Yeah, I think I'm having really bad side effects from the shot that you mandated I get, or I think I got COVID at work. I'm going to pursue a workers' comp claim. Don't delay. Better, and if not, then you got nothing to lose. You don't go to jail, you don't pay a fine, nothing bad happens. You just don't prevail. So better safe than sorry.
And I would tell people, if you feel like you got injured, get checked out as quickly as you can, right? Because I have people that they have stuff that's been going on for a year and a half now, and then they come to me a year and a half later and I say, well, I can't determine causality, but I can say, I have one guy that I just saw, his employers forcing him to, or actually it's a school in the community is forcing him to get the first vaccine. Since then, he has had chest pain, swelling. He has every sign of myocarditis, but he never got evaluated because he didn't have good insurance. So I was like, oh, we should work that up now at least and see if you do have these kind of issues. But he can't lift his left arm that he was injected. He can't lift it since then. He has no injury, normal MRI, X-ray, everything's normal, but the guy can't, he has no range of motion in his arm. So I was like, in this kind of case, you look and say, gosh, there's no other reason he should be having these symptoms, but this far out, it's really hard. That's not something I could report to VAERS or something, because, I don't know. And I don't know I'm trying to get all of his old medical records, but unfortunately he didn't get anything evaluated. So I would tell people, look, go get checked out. If you're having some weird autoimmune stuff, go get worked up and figure out what's going on first, because waiting too long is really going to hurt you, in the long run. And a lot of people don't know this is an option. So that's why I wanted to have you on to discuss, if it is the rare case that it does happen, what do you do in that situation?
Well, like I said, you want to make a workers' compensation claim, with the employer. That's the first thing. And then, if you want to contact an attorney, you want to contact a good workers' compensation attorney.
And how do they track you down? I know you have locations. You have to tell me all your locations. I just have this one little tiny location. You got all the fancy stuff over there.
All right, we have the main offices in Chula Vista. We have another office in La Mesa and one in Oceanside. But to contact me, the firm phone number is 619-476-9436, and the website www.jamessextonlaw.com.
All right, and we'll put that in the show notes too, so that people can track you down. And say your phone number one more time, so people who didn't have a pen in their hand can write it down. 619-476-9436. All right. I hope you don't have a lot of cases. That's what I'm hoping, man, just from a medical perspective.
Yeah. I'll
But
just be sad.
unfortunately,
You know what the worst thing about being an attorney is? What do you think the worst thing is?
probably having to deal with doctors. I don't know.
No, we can only deal in money. I'd much rather prefer these people I could, wave a magic wand and get better. But I have, we do workers' compensation cases. Some guy loses his hand and he says, well, thanks for the money, Mr. Sexton, but I'll never throw a baseball with my son again.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Yeah, that's the hard part for us too when we see these.
Money. I'd much rather people, get better than giving them money for their injuries. But that's the system we're dealing with, and that's the best we can do, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's needed, especially if they're in a position where they can't work, or there's we're seeing some neurologic damage and things, memory problems, dementia getting worse. We've seen these kind of things, and I think it's important that we at least address it so that we can say, okay, why is it happening? How do we fix the problem? Where's the, what can we do from a medical perspective? Because waiting and allowing it to be a big problem, I think we're just scratching the surface right now. I really do, because I'm talking to doctors around the world, and we all have the same concerns, and it's hard because a lot of people just can't speak out. And again, I want to make it clear for the medical board listening, I'm not saying I'm anti-vax. I'm not saying don't get vaccinated. I'm saying people need to know if there is a risk. Then they need to be able to make an informed consent choice on that. And our job as physicians is to provide that. And it's really, really critical that we sleep at night, that we say, look, my job, my responsibility comes to my patient. And if I think there's possible harm, I have to discuss that. Whether anyone likes it or not, whether pharma likes it, it is what we have to do. We're called to do that. Just like if I was a car salesman, I can't tell you just the good part about the car. If the car blows up every 100,000 miles, I would have to tell you that. I would have to disclose that. So I think it's really important that ethics play a role in medicine. And I think a lot of people are swallowing their ethics and following guidelines and not really saying, gosh, here's what I'm seeing, guys. It's 1 in a billion chance, but at least there's that one chance where you can make, like, your daughter can make a decision now and saying, I don't want to take a risk of having, my autoimmune stuff get worse. Yeah. You have to have a say in that. And it's really, I think I really have been saying that it's the attorneys who are going to save the system in this. Like, you guys will be the heroes and the doctors are the goats coming of it. We've switched places from a few years ago, I think, just because it is, people are going to be having, they're losing their careers, they're losing their houses, they're losing their small businesses. And I think, I've seen the ramifications, because I can't just worry about one condition. I have to look at the whole organism. And we've seen a huge increase in suicides. A good friend of a friend of mine just committed suicide yesterday, right? A pretty well-known guy in San Diego. And, there's a lot of this happening where people are losing their businesses, they're losing hope. And so, gosh, even though you're not going to get your ability to walk, at least you're going to have some financial security for your family, and something that, that you'll be compensated in some way.
And just a real aside on this, but even in these workers' compensation cases, if you cannot go back to work because of your COVID vaccine injury or getting COVID contracting at work, one of the benefits is they do have to supply you with job retraining. A lot of people don't know that too. And the last case I did have, I think the lady is going to try and go to culinary school and become a chef, believe it or not. So
yeah, sometimes you find a new, yeah, exactly.
So there are, it's like, oh, gee, that's great, you got me some money, but hey, what am I going to do now? I can't go back to my job, that I had before. Well, then the workers' comp people have to pay for you to get retrained in a different field. So that's another little benefit of workers' comp most people are not aware of.
Yeah, and I have to ask you one last question, since it's Life's Best Medicine podcast. What's life's best medicine to you? Where do you find your satisfaction? Where do you go when things are a struggle, or if you're talking to your daughter on your deathbed saying what really matters? What kind of wisdom would you pass along to my listeners?
As far as, well, I don't know if there's probably a lot of Christian people listening, but I think relationship with God is the most important, to be honest with you. And here's why. You might think I'm a weirdo, but when I first started out, here I was, I started my own business when I was about 40 years old. We didn't have a lot, right? So I remember we had this one case, and this lady, I told her I could get her $50,000 for her car accident, which is a pretty good settlement. She says, oh no, I have a friend of a friend of a friend, and they say it's worth $150,000. And man, I needed that $50,000 settlement. I had a mortgage to pay. I didn't have hardly very many clients at that time. Every dime was important. And here's this woman telling me, no, my case is worth $150,000. I'm going to get some other attorney. And sure enough, she got some other attorney. I'm leaving. I'm getting some other attorney. And I remember sitting in my garage going, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my mortgage? What are we going to do? This is terrible. And you might think I'm a weirdo, some people listening might, but I heard a voice and it said, who's your source? And I froze. And, you know, I wish I could say I hear voices like that every day. Well, maybe if I did, I'd be crazy or something, but I knew then and there whose voice I was hearing. And I said, oh God, I'm sorry. You know, you're my source. It's not this lady with her $50,000 case. You're my source. And I said, you know, please forgive me. You know, I just got to keep in mind that you're my source, not this lady. And sure enough, and she left, and eventually she settled her case for $55,000. So I guess I was off by 5,000. But she had like 2 or 3 attorneys after me, and after spending all the costs and everything else, she probably netted in her pocket less than if she'd taken the original $50,000 offer. But that's the thing there. That's what you got to keep mindful. You know, who's your source in all of this? And a lot of people say, well, gee, Mr. Sexton, why are you so successful? Why do you get such good settlements? How are you doing? And I tell them, and I think I'm kidding with them or I'm lying to them. I'm pulling their leg. I say, well, I pray over my cases. I pray over my clients. And they go, oh, come on. What's your secret? How do you do these things? How are you getting these results? How have you stayed in business for this long and everyone else is going out of business? You know, because face it, you know, if people are on lockdown and they're not working, people aren't getting hurt at work and they're not coming to see me because they're not getting hurt at work. And people aren't on the highways driving their cars because they're at home. They're not getting in car accidents. They're not coming and seeing me. How are you still staying so big? How are you still doing so well? You know, and I tell them things like that and they think I'm pulling their legs, but it's the absolute truth.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you said that because guess what? I started this podcast. You don't know my history. We just met, but I have another podcast called Low Carb MD, which has like over 5 million downloads. And, you know, we're talking about diet, nutrition, metabolic disease, all the stuff we're talking about. And then I would talk about faith and people would say, you're a doctor, you should know better. Why are you talking about this crazy stuff? And, you know, we just want to hear about nutrition. I go, well, believe it or not, all this affects you. If people have faith, do better, less stress, that you lower the stress hormones, you lower your insulin level. So if you get enough sleep and you're not stressed, and you don't have the weight of the world on your shoulders all the time, you do better. My patients of faith do better. So when I started talking about that, people would get upset. So I said, oh, let's start a podcast and have people like you. And I didn't know that you were going to say that. I appreciate it because I've had the top neurosurgeons on, I've had cardiologists and all these guys lean on faith. So I think leaning on faith helps you get through the hard times. And that's one of the things I wanted this podcast to be a light, you know, for people who say, you know, I've lost all hope. But when you have that faith and you go, where's my source come from? See, I left a practice where I was successful, you know, 18 years of practice. And so God said, I'm leading. I didn't hear his voice, but I felt like everything showed, okay, Brian, you don't have to be hit by a stick on the head to understand this is not a good situation. But once I took that step of faith, then all of a sudden God says, here, I'll put dirt under your feet. Here you go. Keep going. Here, go this, walk on this path. So I think those of us who follow that, I think that's our success isn't because we're smart. I think it's because we work. In your case, you might be smart, but in my case, it's because I worked hard and I said, okay, I'll be obedient. If you want me to talk about this stuff, I'll even have attorneys on my podcast to talk about this. You know, that's how I'm kidding you. But, you know, I think it's really important, but we all have our area where you can help people that I can't help. And I maybe can help people that you can't help. And maybe we help the same people sometimes, you know?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good stories. Like I could sit here for another 2 hours and tell you story after story, how God intervened in my life. And
how about one more? Can you do one more? Do you got time for it?
It really doesn't have to do with law, but it just shows
I don't care,
you,
man. I want to hear how God intervened.
So here I am. I'm obviously faith believing, and I believe in divine healing and all this. Well, lo and behold, I get bacterial pneumonia, and I didn't know I had it at the time. And to be honest, my family doctor told me I just had a bad sinus infection until my temperature got to 106 degrees.
Oh my goodness.
And at that time, this was in the late 90s, and they had the mercury thermometers, and the highest they go is 106. It could have been more for all I know. All I know is it was maxed out at 106, and it was at the very top. Right? I should have died. But my wife knew enough, and so she just put ice all over my body, and she had a fireman from across the street get me to the hospital. And of course, I get to the hospital and the doctor says, there's nothing wrong with this guy's sinuses. He's got bacterial pneumonia. We got to admit him right now and start me. He's maybe got another day to live unless we do something. So I lost 30 pounds in 4 days, or 40 pounds, I guess, in 3 or 4 days. They'd call my parents from Oklahoma to come to San Diego because they were sure I wasn't going to make it. And here I am sitting in the hospital bed, freezing one time because my fever's so high, and then burning up, and then freezing and sweating through my bed sheets, hallucinating, delirious. And all I could remember is at night, this one orderly would come in about 3 a.m. It'd be completely dark, completely silent. And I'd just be sitting there. And some of the times where I had my faculties about me, I said, wow, I guess, am I going to die? Am I going to see, my kids grow up? What's going to happen? And this man would come in. I said, how can this be? I'm a Bible believing person. I believe in divine healing. How can this be happening to me? And how can I be like almost on my deathbed? Don't I have enough faith? What's wrong with me? Is God not listening? Is he not hearing my prayers? I don't understand. So I felt really alone. But this guy would come in, this orderly would come in, and he talked to me and say, hey, you're going to make it. The antibiotics are eventually going to take effect, because apparently the antibiotic of choice for that I was allergic to, and they had to give me choice B, and it was taking a lot longer to take effect. So here are several days going by, and I really wasn't improving. But he would come in and, hey, you're going to see your kids grow up. You're going to get to see your son get married. My son was maybe 5 years old at the time. I told this story at his wedding, and it made me cry. So hopefully I won't cry here. You're going to see your son get married. You're going to recover. You're going to pull through. You're going to make it. And you know how you want to. And so when he first said that, I was like, delirious. But as the day went on, I started repeating it. I'm going to make it. The antibiotics are going to take effect. I'm going to get to see my son get married someday. I'm going to pull through. I'm going to get out of here. So I was in there for 2 weeks, basically. I finally got well enough, and they released me. And I remember going out in a little wheelchair, and they're wheeling me out to the parking lot. And I said, oh, wait. So my wife was with me. I said, you know what? We got to stop at the front desk. I got to tell the nurse, duty nurse, or the head nurse, I never got to say thank you to that guy for, encouraging me and speaking over me, all those nights that I was there. So I went up to the front desk, and she said, well, Mr. Sexton, you're mistaken. We haven't had a male orderly on this floor in over 5 months. We don't know what you're talking about. And as I stand here today, I believe that was an angel that God had sent. And here I am, miserable and feeling alone and destitute, and nobody's caring. God has, forgotten about me, and being forgotten.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. And I have a lady, the same thing. That was a similar story. And she said, doctor, did you see the 2 beautiful ladies that were just here? They told me it wasn't time, and she was really sick the night before. And I went out and I asked the nurse, hey, who was just in here? And she said, no one's been in here all day. They said it's not my time. And I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? It was that was an eerie. I had goosebumps all over. I was like, wow. And she was, they were just here, doc. You just missed them. They're beautiful. They were so nice. I was like, okay, maybe you had an angel visit you or something. I'll take it. Right?
It was. Yeah. So
So the orderly
isn't there. He's there. He's as close as the mention of his name.
Man, we'll take it. Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for clearing this up and for talking about this stuff. But thank you for sharing your faith. I know it's hard to do, and publicly a lot of us don't talk about it so much, but I think it's so critical that people who are struggling with hope now know there's hope, and that you could say, look, here's what I experienced. You could think I'm crazy. It doesn't matter. I know what I experienced, and I think a lot of us feel the same way. So thank you. It's a blessing to have you on. I really appreciate your time. I know you make more money per hour than I do. That's for sure. So no, I appreciate you coming on, and I'm really looking forward to people getting this out. And I think that people who are having troubles can contact you, and you can give them a little bit of hope in the struggle. So Jim, thanks so much for joining me, and I'll put a connection to all of your stuff, and hopefully we connect soon.
We'll talk again soon. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks for joining me.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.